Cantonese and Mandarin, those are, I'd say they're kind of three categories there, because you've got Cantonese, you've got mainland Mandarin, and you've got Taiwan Mandarin. And so Cantonese is the most prevalent in Hong Kong, and they use what are called traditional characters, which are the most complicated characters, like the Chinese strokes, and you've got like 16, 20 strokes, like just lots and lots of strokes. And they speak Cantonese, which is slightly different than Mandarin. Whereas Taiwan, they use those same characters, those traditional characters, and they take Mandarin, and they make Mandarin sounds to it with a slight Taiwanese accent. And then you've got mainland China, and they, for the most part, speak just regular Putonghua or Mandarin, and they use different characters, and those are simplified characters. And what they've done is they've taken one character and they've taken out a few of the strokes. Not too many that it's not recognizable, but enough that they still know that it's the same character as the traditional. And so they probably only have 2,000 or 3,000 simplified characters, and the rest are traditional. So for me, for instance, I got really good at reading traditional, but if you gave me like a simplified Chinese Book of Mormon, I probably couldn't read half the characters even. And so that was sometimes a struggle if you're trying to teach someone who knows Mandarin, because they want to read in simplified, but all you know is traditional, and so you're just trying to find the medium ground between those two. But certainly I've been back for 4 months, and now I'm studying Mandarin, and it comes pretty naturally. Like, there are enough differences in Cantonese and Mandarin that you can tell they're not the same language. But for a Cantonese speaker, it's pretty easy to hear Mandarin and understand it, but not necessarily easy for a Mandarin speaker to understand Cantonese. My mom, she speaks Portuguese, and she says it's easy for her to understand Spanish, but Spanish people don't understand Portuguese very well. So that would be like a good comparison, maybe. But yeah, there are thousands of characters, like 30,000 plus characters in Chinese. You need about 5,000 to be able to read a newspaper, and you need probably close to 2,000 or 3,000 to read the Book of Mormon. And so towards the end of my mission is when I got up near about 2,000, 3,000 characters, and that was when I was really able to read the Book of Mormon in Chinese with investigators, and so that was a lot of fun. Another thing about Cantonese is that it's tones. There are a lot of tones to the language, and so you'll have like a high tone, a mid-tone, a mid-rising, a mid-falling, and then you have a low rising. And so those are kind of the standard tones with a few little deviations. Whereas Mandarin, they have a high tone, high falling. They have this alternating tone that goes down and up. And then they have I think I said they have a rising, they have a mid-tone. And so you have 4 tones versus 6. And so that's why some people think it's easier to move from Cantonese to Mandarin, is because you're taking out a few of those tones. But certainly for me, even some of those tones aren't the same, so it's not an easy transition. Like if the word is in Cantonese, if it's a low rising tone, it's not necessarily a low rising tone in Mandarin. It could be like a high falling. And so certainly having to relearn the characters and how to say things has been a little bit of a challenge, but it's really easy to hear Mandarin for me. And as a missionary in Hong Kong, you'll probably contact a lot of Mandarin speakers, and so you'll get pretty good at understanding Mandarin, even if you can't speak it. This is one you're going to use every day, I promise, and it's lei ho, and that's a low rising tone, and you say lei, and that means you, and then ho means good, like how are you? Are you good? And so you have a low rising and a mid rising, lei ho, and it kind of sounds like it's in the back of my throat a little bit. Whereas in Mandarin, they say ni hao, and so those are the third tones. And so it's ni hao, and that's a little more in the front of your mouth. Instead of being in the back of my throat when I speak Mandarin, it's right up near my teeth. And then Cantonese is a little further back in my throat because there's a lot of there's glottal stops. And so those are things you'll pick up on over time. Certainly when I started learning Chinese, it was really hard to make sure that it was in the back of my throat but not too far. And now that I'm learning Mandarin, it's even harder to make sure it's in the front of my mouth. But certainly with time and practice and experience, you'll be able to pick those things up. And you'll hear the tone differences, and you'll be able to recognize that, oh, that's a low rising, because it's a lei. And it sounds like it's further back in his throat. And then ho sounds like it's kind of in like the middle of my throat. And it's a little higher sounding than the lei. And so in the context, you'll be able to pick up those tones really easily. So maybe you don't know the word, but you can ask like your senior companion, or you can ask a native and say, hey, what does this mean? And they could tell you pretty accurately what it is. Certainly. So in Cantonese, if I want to say, hello, my name is Elder Sivak, I'd say, Lei Ho, O Hai Xin, Zheng Lao. And then in Mandarin, I'd say, Ni Hao, Wo Shi, Xian Zhang A. And so those kind of sounded similar, like Zhang A. And then Zheng Lao means elder. And so you'll pick up that real quick. My character, my last name in Chinese is Xin, which is mid-rising. But in Mandarin, it's Xian, which is a third tone, which is that V, which is Xian. And so certainly with time, you'll be able to be like Ni Hao or Lei Ho, and you'll pick those up real fast, and you'll be able to distinguish a little bit better.
A funny thing about Cantonese is that if you say a word in a different tone, it can have a totally different meaning. And a perfect example of that is my last name. So being Chinese and being from Asian descent, my ancestors are from the Canton province of China. And so I had a real last name. Whereas like missionaries will be assigned names that are similar sounding to their last name. And so mine's is a very rare name, and it's said in the high tone of the the tone. And if you say it in a mid-rising tone, then it's no longer my last name. It actually means a swear word. And so as I was learning, when I first got to the MTC and I was learning how to say my last name, it was very funny experience because, I probably swore a bunch, but the teachers, regardless, they still help you. But lots of them were very shocked to hear the word because, they just don't hear it very often, especially from somebody who's a member. And so, yeah, that's an example of making sure you have good sounds and tones so that you don't say swear words or you don't tell people, different what you meant to say and what you really said. There's a difference. So, yeah, it's probably, I would say it, but I don't want to teach people how to say the wrong word, so, yeah.
When you learn Chinese, one of the most important things, especially in Taiwan, is just like, number one is don't be afraid to make mistakes. Like, don't be afraid to say the wrong thing or to screw up while you're like learning the language, because it's a difficult language and you're going to make mistakes. Like, that's inevitable. Like, you're going to say something wrong, you're going to have the wrong tone, you say something. And so I'd say always like seek out, if you don't know how to say something, or if you don't know, if you don't know how to say something, or you like don't know how to use it, like just be willing to ask people, natives, and like just strike up conversations like, hey, like I'm trying to learn Chinese right now, like how do I say this, or like how do I use this word, or like what does this character mean? So I think that just be fearless when you go out. Just don't be afraid to make mistakes. And of course you're gonna make mistakes, but that's not a huge issue. Like I think if you're willing, if you have a passion to learn the language, it'll make learning it so much easier. So, and I don't know, when I was there, like I loved the process of learning a language because it opens up a whole new world to you, and like it helps you to kind of see the world differently and like learn why their language is the way it is. So And also, just one more thing. I think a really important thing is to just make sure that you're willing to like work hard in terms of like learning the vocab and learning the vocabulary. I mean, learning the vocabulary, learning the grammar, because it's a really important part of learning the language. Like, I used to have this idea that like, oh, if you're just immersed in the environment, like you kind of just soak it up like a sponge. And to an extent, like you do pick up on things, but your language learning will be so much faster if you're willing to put like a lot of time and effort into like trying to learn new things. So those are some just language learning tips. So Chinese is a tonal language, and for me, I never actually had a problem with tones. I know that a lot of American missionaries really struggle getting used to tonal language because, you know, for example, in English, if we're asking a question, usually our voice goes up on the end of a question, like, where is that? You know, like, so our voice goes up. But when you're speaking Chinese, you don't do that because every word has a tone associated with it. And there's 4 tones in Mandarin. So there's a high tone, and then there's a rising tone. There's a third tone, which is, it goes down and then it goes up. And there's a fourth tone, which is like just down, just a down tone. And at least for me, I don't know if it's because I had a musical background, but tones wasn't ever really a huge issue for me. Chinese grammar is wonderful in the sense that it's very, it's actually pretty simple. I think that it's a lot simpler than English grammar or Spanish grammar even, because there's no conjugations in Chinese. You don't ever conjugate verbs like we do in English or in Spanish. Like we just, in Chinese, what you do is you specify the time. Like, for example, let's say you're going to go to the store tomorrow. You say, I tomorrow go to store. Or like, I'm going to go buy things tomorrow. You'd say like, 我明天要去买东西. So that's like, I want to like, this thing, like I tomorrow want to go buy things. And so it's a little bit of a more simple, it's a little bit of a simpler grammar structure than English, which I really liked. It's funny because in Chinese there's certain words. This is something that I didn't really know prior to speaking Chinese, but like there's certain words that there really just is no translation for, where it's conveying a certain idea or it's conveying a certain thought. In English, we couldn't express that with a single word, but there's a single word for that in Chinese. Like, for example, in Chinese, the word 辛苦 is very common. And so when people say the word 辛苦, it's kind of like, wow, that's so like tough. Like that's so, it's like they're like kind of looking at you in admiration about you. Let's say you're doing like a hard task and someone's like, oh, 辛苦你了. It's like, oh, you're so hardworking, but it's not just hardworking. It's like, I admire the fact that you're so hardworking because that looks like a tough task, but I kind of, it's almost like it sucks to be you. Like, I'm glad you're doing that, but I wouldn't want to do that personally. So it conveys that idea in a single word. And so there's a couple different words in Chinese where it's just like, it's such a useful word that we don't have here in English. And so, yeah.
Since the Chinese people, most of them that we met were foreign exchange students from mainland China, we really had a lot of different accents that we encountered, a lot of different, I mean, they were all Mandarin, but people from different areas of China have different accents, and especially sometimes if their local dialect in China is really different than Mandarin, then they had a really strong accent, or sometimes they use some words that we were unfamiliar with, but it's all good. You know, you just ask them what that word means and everything. But yeah, I think different than a lot of missionaries that go to Taiwan, and there's definitely a big difference between the Taiwanese accent and even words that they use between what people with like standard 普通话 in Beijing, what they speak. There's just a bit of a difference there, I guess. Trying to think of, I don't know how to explain it. Like the people in Beijing have a harder R when they speak, and Taiwanese people don't really use the R very much. There's a lot of words in Mandarin that end with R, or sometimes people in Beijing add the R sound to random words just because it's their accent and they like that sound. So it sounds kind of funny to people in Taiwan. At least it's just pretty different. So I'd say missionaries that go and learn Chinese outside of Taiwan or Hong Kong will most likely meet a lot of people with more Beijing kind of Chinese and not have as much of a Taiwanese accent like some of the elders and sisters that come back from Taiwan. So it's a little bit different, but you can still easily communicate with someone from Taiwan. I personally felt like it was a little bit harder to understand people from Taiwan, and still even now, just because I'm more used to people with a northern accent. I guess it's what I'm used to. But So And as well, one kind of funny thing as well is when Chinese people came to England and learned English really well, it was kind of interesting to hear a person speak with a British English accent and then speak Chinese as well. That was an interesting combination. That was really fun. But other than that, I mean, yeah, it was really a cool experience, I think, in a way, to get kind of an overall idea of what Chinese accents are like. Just meeting people from so many different places. I mean, people from, Dongbei that have a really, really strong accent sometimes, and sometimes just having such a spectrum of different accents. It was really interesting to learn about. I mean, using the R sound that people in the north especially make. Like if they said, if somebody from China said, "I'm Chinese," they'd say, 我是中国人. But somebody from Taiwan might say, 我是台湾人. And so it's a little bit less pronounced of an R sound. Or really, sometimes it's almost gone completely. And so at first when you're learning Chinese, you kind of get used to one accent, and then you hear the other, and you're just totally lost. You're thinking, what are they saying? And then once you have more experience with Chinese, you can kind of bridge between the two and understand different people. But it's easier over time. At first, they are very different. So I especially remember at the MTC, actually, they have kind of some pre-recorded conversations and things of different Chinese people that you listen to. And the guy from the north, I never really heard the northern accent when I was in the MTC. And when that guy spoke, I didn't know anything that he said. So that was pretty funny. Yeah, there's some differences. They use different words. Like they have different words for bicycle, different words for taxi and stuff like that. Kind of in a funny parallel, me being in England, they have different words for, cookie. They say biscuit. Instead of saying chips, they say crisps. Instead of they have a lot of different words for things. There's so many, I can't even remember them all, but it's pretty funny. They even for cars, I mean, they say, instead of the trunk, and for the hood, they say oh man, now I can't even remember it. They say bonnet for the hood, and they say the boot for the trunk. That's what it is. And so it's funny kind of having that experience and learning all these different kind of exchangeable words for different things. But Chinese has its own thing, just like English does, of different areas use different words for the same idea. Yeah, it's a lot of fun though. Just because that's the people that I served with, I definitely love that accent, and it kind of just feels a little bit like home sometimes when I hear people that have that really strong accent. So I still like to keep in touch with my friends in China and from China that I've met, and it's fun always hearing their accents and stuff.
English and Chinese, they pretty much share no resemblance. There's no similarity at all. In other words, they're not cognitive language. Yeah, they share no root. So, way different. I can tell you a little bit about Chinese is that the grammar is easy because the verb always stay the same. For example, the verb never changes. I'll say, today I go to library, or I say, yesterday I go to library, or I will say, tomorrow I go to library. So it makes it really easy. So you catch up the grammar really quick. As you probably already heard of, it's a tonal language. So Chinese has 4 different tones. It goes, the first tone is high-pitched flat. So for example, if using ma, as an example, first tone goes ma, the second tone goes up, ma, third tone goes down and up, ma, the fourth tone goes down, ma. Different tones, it sometimes mean completely different things. And different tones, they have different characters. We use characters instead of letters, if you don't know that. Characters associated with different tones. So that's the pronunciation. So usually the hardest part for new language learning in Chinese is just the tone part. I didn't get the tone right, but once you get it done, it's not that hard after all to speak or to listen. Reading and writing is quite different though, since it is we use characters, so you cannot really spell out. When you hear of the word, it doesn't give you any clue how to spell out the word or the character. So you have to memorize the characters. So don't get frustrated. It's okay. A lot of missionaries, by the time they finish their mission, they still can't really read Chinese or write in Chinese. Some of them do, and my best wishes to you that you are those types that you pick up really quickly. But use mostly just speaking and listening as a missionary. English and Chinese. Yeah, there really sure no resemblance. That's like the easiest way and the best way I can put it. Yeah. There's some words that were created in English, and then we try to translate it into Chinese, so they sound about the same with English. Like, a couch or sofa. A sofa in Chinese we say shafa. What else? Oh, I should know a lot. I'm gonna forget them. But there are some words that translated phonetically from English, but not a whole lot. So good luck if you're learning Chinese and everything. They'll put you in the MTC for like 9 weeks right now, and you'll pick it up.
Chinese definitely is a tone language, especially. I think it's hard to learn Mandarin, either in Cantonese as a Cantonese speaker or as an English speaker. One of the funny thing was the first vision. At the end, in English it says, "This is my beloved son, hear him." And beloved in Chinese, it's 爱子, beloved son, 爱子. And when you change the tone, it will be a midget, 爱子. And so there was one missionary who was sharing the first vision in the lesson, and he said, "Oh, 这是我的爱子,听他说." And the investigator was so confused. What? A midget? So just be aware of your tones. Yeah, and be humble enough to change and to accept what people say to you. Yeah, it's for your own good.
So my parents are from Hong Kong. They immigrated to Toronto before I was born. I was born and raised in Toronto, and we mostly spoke English and Cantonese at home, like my older sister and I. And I had lived in China for 3 years when I was younger, so I was able to learn a bit of Mandarin there. But I would say the two languages are pretty different. The characters that you read are the same, but the way you pronounce them are completely different. For example, in Cantonese there are 9 tones, whereas in Mandarin there's only 4. So that is a huge difference in itself. And also in Cantonese there's a lot of slang, or not slang, it's abbreviations where words that aren't really words are used a lot, but in Mandarin that doesn't really exist. And I think there are some times when you can hear similarities between Cantonese and Mandarin. For example, in Mandarin, "me" is 我, and then in Cantonese it's 我. So it sounds kind of the same, but there is a difference. A lot of people say that Cantonese and Vietnamese sound pretty similar, but I don't understand any Vietnamese at all. I think the tones is what makes those two languages sound similar to people that might not speak it. And I think in learning Mandarin specifically, if you are an American being called to speak Mandarin, I think first getting down the basics is really crucial. First off, it's the phonetics, the pinyin is what we call it. Not the writing characters, but it's like the written pronunciations of the words. That will be like the foundation of everything you build on top of the Mandarin language. Because once you're able to get those phonetics down, and the reading and the pronunciation of those tones and those characters, or not the characters, the phonetics down, once you have that down, as you learn the gospel or as you read from Preach My Gospel in the Pinyin, it will help that much better because you'll be able to excel in a much faster pace compared to if you were still trying to work on those basics like all throughout your mission. Because I know there are some that really get anxious in learning characters or the more advanced stuff in the language, but once that happens, the foundation isn't built as quick or as solid, so then everything else that's built on top of it isn't going to be as firm or like solid, if that makes sense. And I think just speaking the language with your companion or just whoever you see is really important. I think when I was with a companion I had a companion that was American. He was from Utah, and he was called Mandarin speaking, and I was his companion for 3 months. And I definitely wish that I had taken the time to speak the language with him more, and I wish I would have been more patient with him, because when you do have a companion, I think you should fully utilize him or her, because just speaking it makes that much more of a difference. And not being afraid to make mistakes is also really crucial. The more mistakes you make, the better it is, because you'll be able to learn from your mistakes and also just learn not to make those mistakes in the future. And even if you do, it's always a learning process. Like, even though I'm Chinese, my Mandarin is nowhere near perfect, and I'm still trying to learn it and get better at it. So just knowing that there's always room for improvement, but just don't get too hard on yourself, because sometimes you might feel like, oh, like there's all these tones I have to learn, there's all these characters that I could learn, but I don't know any of it yet, or like everyone's laughing at me like when I'm making a mistake. But I think something that's important in the Chinese culture is Chinese people think it's like cool or like cute when you like make a mistake, especially if you're an elder. When you make a mistake, Chinese people, when they laugh, they're not laughing at you, but they're basically like liking you more, if that makes sense, because they see that you're willing to try and willing to put yourself out there to improve. And that's something that when the members do see, that will basically help a lot. And for Cantonese, I think it's pretty similar in learning it, because they are both Chinese languages or Chinese dialects, but just the tones may be a bit different. And for sure with Cantonese, speaking it with someone that does speak Cantonese already will help a lot, because of all those slang terms or abbreviations that I talked about. I'll say like, I'm a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In Mandarin, you say it, 我是耶稣基督后期圣徒教会的传教士. That's Mandarin. And then in Cantonese, you would say, 我係耶穌基督後期聖徒教會嘅傳教士. So you might be able to pick out some similarities, like Jesus Christ in Mandarin is 耶稣基督, and then in Cantonese it's 耶穌基督. Yeah, so there are some similarities for sure, but a ton of differences as well. But the characters that you do read from are the same.
Cantonese has 7 tones, technically 8, but technically we only use like 6. If that makes sense. Because there's this tone called high falling, but you can only recognize it and you use it on something. Some natives don't use it. But the tones, language is very difficult. The grammar is not too bad. The thing with Cantonese is the reason why it's harder than Mandarin is because there's more tones. And what you read in Cantonese is different from what you speak, if that makes sense. It's more formal, but when you read, they're different tones too. So like, it's kind of like learning a new language. So when you read, it's like, for example, g in olga. In Cantonese, that's spoken, but if you're reading, you say oldik, which means mine. Olga, oldik. And just the tones and like, it's just really different when you read. So that was pretty difficult too, is the fact that when you read it, it's going to be different from when you speak. So you have to learn the characters for speaking and for reading. You have to understand the difference. And in Mandarin, well, they're both the same, and there's less tones. Pronunciation is a big deal. You want to sound like just like in English, you want to sound like a native, and so like that took some time to pick up. But I loved it, trying to sound like a native. The tones, naturally, you eventually learn them because you just review so much, and you start to pick up really quick words you don't know, words you don't understand. Just like, for example, I'm sure a lot of people, know if the last person you've talked to, but I mean, for example, Lord, I mean, there's so many different tones. Like Lord is Ju, or you got Ju, which is pig, Ju is Lord, or Ju, which is live. Same thing, but they're different tones, like it contains everything. And I have a story in regards to the language. I didn't know my first area. And I was just like humming, kind of singing this song. And I was like, dun, 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 dun. And I was swearing. I had no idea. But in English, it's completely fine. And my native companion was like, stop that. And I was like, what? It's like, what am I doing wrong? And he's like, just stop. And he wouldn't tell me why at first. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? And like, so I was like, whatever. It's like, naturally, I just started doing it. I was like, dun, 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 dun. And he's like, stop that. And I was like, what? I was like, what am I doing wrong? And I was swearing. I kept swearing in Chinese. And it's just because the tone, it goes up like this. And I won't say it, but it's just, it begins with D and just goes up like this. And I was swearing like every time because it was the same word. So I just kept saying the F word. And so I was just like, I had no idea. It's kind of bad, but I was swearing. And it's like, that's just how it is. You never know. And like some people call Ju, like they'll say Ju Gao, like, which is, you're trying to say, which is bishop, Ju Gao. But they say like pig, bishop, or like pig, like just like, this is ridiculous. And like some people like bearing testimony, so you gotta really know your tone, so you could be saying something completely wrong. And like you got fishing, you gotta be really careful when you're saying the word like fishing, and because that could be ending up saying something bad as well. Just random words, you just gotta really be careful with what you say. Also, my name in Chinese is embarrassing because I don't know why this missionary gave me my name, but it's called Oh Hoi Wai. Oh Hoi Wai. That's it's kind of just like not great of a name, and I don't know. I think the native was just making a joke when he came up with it, so I changed my name. I never wanted to learn how to write it because I was so like ashamed of it, and all the natives would laugh at me. They're like, oh, hoi wai, and they're just like laugh at me. I'm just like, yeah, it's like, no, and like just, so that kind of sucked because I had a bad name, and everyone made fun of me. So I finally just started telling them I don't have a name, or I was like, or I just tell them I'm hi, Zhang Long, so I'm mother dog. I'm like, what's your full name? I'm just like, I'm not telling you. It's like, and then finally I'd give him show him I didn't want to say my name, so I just handed him my ID card for Hong Kong, and they would start laughing, and I'm just like, just like that was kind of a bit, because it just kind of means like, my name meant like flowing bladder, and just like, it was bad, like, see, and like, people just made fun of me all the time, so I was like, this sucks. So I changed it, because Bruce Lee is from Hong Kong, or he's not from Hong Kong, he's born in America, which a lot of Chinese people don't like. They don't know that, and they do not like the fact that he's born in America. They're just like, no, he's born in Hong Kong. No, he was born in America, but he did live in Hong Kong for several years. And his name is Lei Xiulong, which means little dragon. So I was always a huge fan of Bruce Lee growing up. And there's a big statue of him in Hong Kong, on Hong Kong Harbor, which is really cool. But his name means little dragon, so I changed my name to Chok Long, which means like excellent dragon, kind of. And I was like, I just thought it was cool. It's like a member did it for me, and so like that's why I changed my name too. And because right now they're trying to make, they don't focus. They used to really focus on the actual meaning of your name. They try to focus on both, but now they focus on trying to actually sound like your English name. I don't know how all sounds like Dodd, I think they should have picked like Dai or something like that, which means like just a lot of missionaries are named Dai. And I don't know why they gave me Aw, but that's just like Chinese in general. Just it's a fun language for me. Like in Spanish, you can pick it up within a couple months. I didn't pick it up. Like I couldn't really like speak a lot till like I was like a year out. Well, it depends on where you serve in Hong Kong, but for me personally, it wasn't until like a year where I could pretty much understand, do what I want, everything, and wasn't just like that quick. It was probably the most stressful time. Like anytime, like every day during language study, I was like, just like sit there. I would carry my language books with me everywhere, and like just anytime I had free time, like while trying to obviously do missionary work. Like I was doing missionary work at lunch, I would just pound them in like for that hour, like while I was eating, and you couldn't waste the time when you're learning Cantonese. You shouldn't waste time. You should take any opportunity you can to learn the language. Obviously, you want to do missionary work. You need to learn to balance it out. And with any language, you don't want to focus too much on the language because you need to be doing missionary work, learning the scriptures. But if you can, you want to do both, especially in Cantonese because it's such a benefit. And it was a difficult language. I was surprised I got called Chinese speaking because I served with some very intelligent people, and I spent the majority of my life just playing sports. It's like it made me realize that Heavenly Father trusted me to learn it, and I had a good work ethic, so I worked really hard. And so like it was really fun. When people think of Chinese, because you got Cantonese, Mandarin, like they're like ching chong chong chong. That's like Cantonese. Mandarin's different, and so it's a fun language. I wish everyone could know it, but it's kind of there's about I guess like 80 million. I've heard 200 million people know Cantonese. You got Hong Kong and then southern China, Guangzhou, Guangdong, like they speak Cantonese, but they also speak Mandarin. And the history behind Cantonese and like how Mandarin came about. This is what my trainer told me. He's a native. He said because Cantonese is actually that difficult for my understanding, so they had a voting. So the government made Mandarin, and they're like, "All right, guys, we made this new language. We're gonna have a vote to see which one you want." And it's like the more northern part of China, most of China, like it barely won, but it chose Mandarin. And now, like the southern part of China, were kind of, I guess, prideful. Not prideful. They just didn't want to switch, so they've kept it. But they've obviously developed. They've taken in Mandarin as well at the same time, but they've kept Cantonese. So Cantonese was the original Chinese language, and I believe a lot of the Asian languages, also like Korean, Japanese, also come from Cantonese originally. So Cantonese is like the traditional Chinese language. So that was a cool fact for me to learn, to understand like the history behind that, and that I'm learning Cantonese. Mandarin, Cantonese, now I've learned Cantonese, it is more easier for me to pick up on than Mandarin learners to learn Cantonese. I can't understand. Right now I'm taking Chinese. It is kind of difficult. Mandarin is difficult, I'm not going to lie. But Cantonese and Chinese in general are fun. They're really fun. And I would recommend anyone learning it, even though it's kind of difficult.
So Cantonese is one of the oldest dialects of Chinese that is around. And it's really neat because it's always changing. It's a colloquial language. And so the Cantonese that is spoken today in Hong Kong is pretty different from what was spoken 50 years ago even. So it's pretty, like, I don't know, a little annoying in that sense because a lot of the stuff that we have is a little outdated at the MTC, but you definitely can get the gist of it, and you can definitely learn how to be fluent. So it's a lot like Mandarin Chinese. I feel like a lot of people have kind of a grasp on what Mandarin Chinese is, except for in Mandarin there's only 4 tones. A high falling, I think a rising tone, and a regular tone. That might be wrong, I'm not sure. But in Cantonese you have 6. There used to be like 9, but we've just like condensed it. And so like depending on how you say stuff, like how you say one word can totally change the meaning of your sentence. For example, this is a funny story. So when I got to Hong Kong, I was trying to say, I just got on a plane to come to Hong Kong. And so in Chinese, that's 我啱啱上飛機去香港. But I didn't say that. I said 我啱啱上飛機去香港. So it's just a little different, but what I actually said was, I just got on a fat chicken and flew to Hong Kong. And so, yeah, that was funny. That member laughed at me for a really long time. But you have to pay attention really to your sounds and tones. I've heard it's a lot easier to learn if you're musical, because you can hear the differences in the tone of voice. I think Hong Kong is really fun when you start learning like how to not really the slang, but like how the natives speak it, as opposed to the really formal way that you learn in the MTC, because you can just throw so much more character into your voice and communicate with people. Like, there are hilarious things that they say all the time that are just so funny to me. Like when someone is trying to say like of course, or like kind of like the English duh, they'll say gamma. It's just like really funny to hear and really funny to say. But yeah, Cantonese also, like, it shares the same written language as Mandarin. So if you can read Mandarin, you can read Cantonese. So they have the same characters, but they're just all pronounced differently. So yeah, it was difficult to learn, but definitely one of the cooler languages out there, because not everyone can speak it. But when you find somebody that can, like, you bond instantly because you're like, I speak this awesome language. So it's really fun. I really enjoy it.
So Mandarin is becoming a very popular language, not because we owe them billions of trillions of dollars or anything, but so I feel like Chinese is an expanding language outside of China because a lot of business is going on between them and the rest of the world right now. They've had a lot of growth. So you want to learn it, one, because it's the greatest language ever, two, because you'll be able to go see the most beautiful places ever and know how to talk to everyone, and three, it was my favorite thing every day, blowing people's mind that a white person could speak Chinese. I don't understand how every day someone was blown away, but they are. And it's easier to go from English to Chinese than Chinese to English, because you get rid of like so many words like the, un. There's just so many words that just get comprised down, and you don't have to worry about certain grammar. I mean, there's a lot of grammar that's really hard that I still don't understand, but there's a lot of things that just get so simplified that makes things very easy. And with the way the world is going right now, and Spanish was a big language before, I think the next biggest thing is Chinese, because it'll have so much use in many parts of the world. And there are so many times when I've encountered Chinese people, and sometimes whenever they've needed help and they don't understand how to speak English, you can be that tool that can help them get where they're going, because you know how to speak their language, literally. Taiwanese Chinese is a little bit different than mainland. They have certain different words for things, as well as a little bit pronunciation. The most well-known difference I could probably describe is that it's like comparing our English to like Sean Connery. Like, our English is Taiwanese and Sean Connery is mainland. So like, I must ask you some questions, but I'm saving them for later, compared to I must ask you some questions, but I'm saving them for later. It just sounds super, super weird. And the first time I heard a mainland Chinese person speak, I just thought they were an Asian Sean Connery, because they just had that heavy sound. I don't even know how to describe it. So like, 你是谁 compared to 你是谁 would be like, who are you? And they kind of have a little bit of an accent. Like, the heavier Dalu mainland accent is 是, whereas you could say 是 compared to Taiwanese, which is 是. There's just the same word. And there's a million different ways to say the same sound. Like, one sound could have 40 characters. But the beauty of it is that it's also simple like that. Once you have the basic like 30 sounds down, that's all you need. Like once you have the sounds down, you can hear things. It'll be different characters, so they'll have different meanings, so you have to go by context. But the difficulty that I had with learning it, but I enjoy now, is that it just has so many levels of learning. You learn pinyin when you're first starting off, and then about a year into my mission, I started working on characters in depth. And they have traditional characters in Taiwan where they have simplified characters just about everywhere else except for like Hong Kong and some BYU classes. After I learned traditional, then I come home from my mission and I have to learn simplified. And there's just so many levels of learning that I went through that I love teaching it to my family. Chinglish is the best language that ever existed, to be honest. Because English has flaws, Chinese has flaws, but together they can make the super perfect language that ever existed. Because their grammar is different, but sometimes the usage is just so convenient. And the word convenient in Chinese is just so convenient to use because everyone uses it. Everyone uses it. Like, oh, can you come to church? Oh, it's not convenient. And at first, when I was in the culture, I was like, what? What do you mean it's not convenient? Or like, they just use it for everything. It's in context. It was hilarious. Especially for me being a foreigner, not understanding their culture of how they use certain words, or this word hai hao can be used in just every sense of kind of not agreeing, but not like shutting you down. It's the sense that I felt that it had, like, oh, it's kind of cold outside, and you just be like hai hao, which would mean like not really, but it would just be like based on the perspective of the situation. There was never like a definite feeling that it had. So that's what I loved about Chinese, is it had just such a different feel to the usage of it that I haven't studied other languages other than like Spanish or American Sign Language, which I guess every culture has its own, every language has its own culture. The accents are a little thick or thin in certain areas, which makes it hard to understand, or they speak really fast in certain places, which makes it really hard to understand. There are multiple dialects, many dialects. On my mission I encountered Hakka Chinese, Taiwanese, Mandarin Chinese, Cantonese, and there are many more. But I knew someone from Singapore that could speak 13 languages, like 9 of them being Chinese dialects. And I was like, I can't even grasp one. So it's just remarkable that I feel like the skill they have for languages, most of them are multilingual. Like at least speak Mandarin and Taiwanese, like at least. And then a lot of them are working on English or something else.